This was a little gadget that was associated with a bouquet of roses that Wilfred sent me. I was in Oshawa, he was in Winnipeg. Before we got married, I think it may have been before we were even engaged, I'm sure it was. We were communicating this long-distance relationship. He sent me a bouquet of roses, and with this bouquet of roses was a little gadget that was inserted in it, and that this little heart was with it. I cut it off the stick that it was on. I didn't keep the stick, it was too much, but I kept the little rose, and I have it yet. Well, I'm happy to be with you this morning. It is a pleasant morning here, and I hope it is for you a pleasant day. I'm going to be telling you just a bit about what my life has been about in the last 50 or so years. Even before 50 years ago. I'll start in the 1960s. That's more like 60 years ago. And then what was transpiring. I was in my 20s at that time, and I was wondering what should I pursue. I had already passed my certification for being a teacher, an elementary school teacher in Ontario. And then I was teaching in the Toronto District School Board, had taught a number of years already in Niagara Falls and then also into Toronto. And of course, as you know, when you're in your 20s, even before, one becomes interested in knowing what the future will hold as far as relationships are concerned. And so I'm going to be telling you something about relationships this morning, and how I met the person whom I later married, and how we got married. My name is Jo, and my husband was named WILFRIED. No, not, sometimes we abbreviated that to Wilf, but his name was WILFRIED. Now here in Canada we say WILFRIED, but in Germany it is WILFRIED. And he originally came from Germany. By the 1960s, he was no longer in Germany. He was born in Germany in the mid-30s. And when he was 4 years old, World War II began. Now, I can only imagine what it must have been like for his family. He was a few years old, 4 years old. His sister was 2 years old. And his dad was called into the military, and off he had to go to Norway to fight in Norway. So the mother was left with the children in Germany, in Hamburg. And so the war proceeded. Fortunately, his father was sent to Norway and not to the Soviet Union, because it was more likely for him to return from service in Norway than if he had been sent to the Soviet Union. At any rate, after the war ended in 1945, his dad was able to come home. Now, after the war was over, the parents wanted to send Wilf, or WILFRIED, to an Adventist school because they were Adventists and had been Adventists for quite some while. So they decided to send him to Marienhöhe, which was a school in central Germany. So he went to Marienhöhe. During the war years, I think that school had been taken over by the military, and then when the war was ended, then the Marienhöhe returned to the Adventist Church and was there a school for Adventists in Germany for a number of years. I don't know if it's still serving or not. I know they have another school in Germany called Friedensau, which is a university now serving. At any rate, Wilf went to Marienhöhe, and then he came home and things changed. And instead of going back to Marienhöhe to continue his education there, at the age of 16 in 1951, his family came to the United States. California, what a beautiful place to come to. And the reason why they were able to come to California was because they were sponsored as immigrants by a Seventh-day Adventist medical doctor who was practicing in California. So they were sponsored, they came to California, they settled in, the father got a job, and Wilf went again to a Seventh-day Adventist school in California. I think he was then ready to start grade 11. So he went to, I think it was called Newbury Park Academy. And he attended the academy for 2 more years and graduated. Now you may say, here they were just recently immigrated. How was it possible for him to go to an Adventist school and pay the tuition and fees? I think he was a dormitory student. Well, I suspect that the sponsor continued to assist and helped with his education. And for that matter, I believe the other 2 children, the sister and also the brother who was younger than, both of them were younger than Wilf, they also went to Adventist schools. So then when the 2 years at Academy were finished, then Wilf went to Adventist University. He attended La Sierra College, and he was there for 4 years and graduated with a degree in math science area. I'm not sure if it was chemistry or whatever. He graduated in the math sciences. And when he was finished with that, well, he wanted to continue to go to an Adventist school and do his medical training, because his objective was to be a medical doctor. Maybe the medical doctor sponsor was the inspiration for it, I don't know. At any rate, he decided that he wanted to go to to Loma Linda University. But there was a problem with that. The cost was more than he could afford, and maybe the sponsorship, the help from the medical doctor was no longer promised. So instead of going to Loma Linda University, he decided to go to a nearby country. He would still be able to travel back and forth from Southern California to Mexico, to Guadalajara in Mexico, which is in central country, part of the country. There was a university there that had medical training available, so that's where he decided to go. I sometimes think, what a challenge that was, to go to a new country and to learn another language and to do your medical training in a foreign language. But he took it on, And he went. And he spent, I think, 5 or 6 years, 6 years, I believe, in Mexico. Much of the first year, I was involved in learning the language. Yes, he took courses in medical work as well, but learning the language. And then more medical training until he graduated with his medical work. Then he had to do a 6th year in Mexico, which was expected of those who were working or training there, because there were areas, I don't know if that still is the case, but maybe it still is, there were areas of Mexico that were understaffed as far as medical help is concerned. They just didn't have enough medical support in those areas. So he was sent to an area of Mexico where his medical training was needed, and so he served there for a year because Mexico had given him the medical work, the training, so therefore he served. And so then when that was done, then he came back to the United States, and he was going to do his medical practicing in the United States. Now he tried, and he wrote the exams. Of course, he had to write the exams in the United States, and that's challenging. So that didn't work well for him, and it didn't happen in the United States. He tried, I think, he went to Kansas, if I'm correct. Didn't work there. So he tried another thing. He decided to come to Canada. And so he did that. He came to Toronto. And it was there that in the mid-60s, I met Wilf. He came to Toronto. He got a job in a hospital lab. His training certainly qualified him for whatever he was doing there. And he was working in the lab and anticipating that he would write the exams in Canada. If I remember correctly, he called them the ECFMG exams. Don't know what all those letters stand for. But he wrote the ECFMG exam. Didn't happen. How did I meet him? In Toronto. I didn't know he was working in a lab. I didn't know who he was. But I met him because as an Adventist, he decided to attend an Adventist church on Sabbath. No, it wasn't the Willowdale church where I was attending. Well, then where was it? It was the German Adventist Church in downtown Toronto. They were meeting in an assembly hall there, and he attended there. Well, my mother and dad, my dad particularly, didn't understand English very well. My mom didn't speak English. Well, she spoke it reasonably well, but she didn't. So my mom and dad went to the German church in Toronto. And there they met Wilf that one Sabbath. Well, being friendly and receiving, my mom said, come home for lunch. And so Wilf came home to our place for lunch. That's when I first met Wilf. When they brought him home to have lunch at our place, and so he stayed in the afternoon, and we visited and chatted a bit. And then he took the bus back to wherever he was at that time. Our first meeting. Well, we met over and over again. I was at Andrews University that summer, doing summer school there. I had done a full year at Andrews, and now I was doing summer school, and then I was going back to Andrews for another full year and another summer when I graduated in the summer of '67. And during those times, I was home occasionally. I would drive home from Andrews during the school year and during the summer months. And occasionally, Wilf and I met again and visited. And we went and saw an area of Toronto that he was familiar with by then. And he wanted to show me this or the other in Toronto. Okay. I think we may have gone to Hyde Park one time. So we got to know each other a bit. And then he told me that he wasn't going to be in Toronto any longer. Oh, where are you off to? Why, he was going to be going to Winnipeg, because he had acquired a position in Winnipeg Hospital there, and he was going to be doing a residency or something of that nature and continue working toward getting his certification by writing the exam and passing the exam. He would be in Winnipeg. So when he got to Winnipeg, we didn't see each other anymore, but he did what he did very well, and that was he communicated by letter. No, this isn't the days that we have now where messages are sent by email. He didn't write by email, at least I don't recall that he did very much. Maybe occasionally, but he wrote actual letters. And I would come home and I'd check to see what was on the mail. We did those in those days. We checked the mail. Now, do people ever check? Well, maybe they do. Anyway, he'd check the mail, I would check the mail, and there'd be a letter from Wilf. So I would read the letter, and then in a day or so, when I had the time, I would write and seal the letter, stamp it, send it off, and he would get the letter. So it was that during those years, we communicated by letter, and he attended a church in Winnipeg. Yes, they had a German church in Winnipeg, which he attended then, because again, it was his home language. And he had been surviving in non-home language in Mexico, and now here in Canada, in the United States, English or Spanish. So he went to church in a German church in Winnipeg. I was attending Willowdale Church, if I was in Willowdale, when I was home, or I was attending the church at Andrews, Pioneer Memorial Church at Andrews. So we wrote letters back and forth, and occasionally, if I happened to be home and then he would take a flight, and I think he may have even taken the train from Winnipeg to Toronto. Maybe not. Yeah, I think he did take the train. It was slower travel, but you got places. And so we met a couple of times as well. Now, I also remember that when I finished with my studies at Andrews, I came to teach at Kingsway College. And one of those first years that I was teaching at Kingsway College, Kingsway had some students that went to a conference meeting at a camp outside of Winnipeg. And I thought, oh, here's an opportunity. They needed transportation to go to the camp. Why was it there? Well, because some of the students were going from Kingsway to the camp near Winnipeg, and some students from Canadian University College, or whatever it was called then, Burnham University, They were coming from Alberta, and they were meeting halfway between, so that's why the conference was there. I took the opportunity to drive our students from Kingsway to the camp near Winnipeg, and when I got there, Wilf came and visited me at the camp. And for that weekend as well, rather than being at the camp, I didn't have to be there. I went to Winnipeg and attended the German church with him and visited with him in Winnipeg. So we gradually got to know one another. I suppose we could say, why was it that I decided to do this long-distance relationship with somebody that was as far away as Winnipeg, that I would meet occasionally, a letter acquaintance? Why would I do something like that? Yes, it took time, didn't it? Well, there were several reasons. There was, in the interim as well, as this acquaintance with Wilf was growing, and as I was getting to know him a bit more and a bit more, I met somebody else in the interim. Again, it was a situation in which somebody comes from a distance away, and I meet him because he comes home to lunch. Yeah, my mom and dad were friendly people. The person that I met was somebody that came this time from the Middle East, from Lebanon to Toronto, and he too was an Adventist who went to the Willowdale Church, and sometimes my parents went to the Willowdale Church, and so they met Nicholas that time, who was from Lebanon, and he came home to my place for lunch. And by this time I was teaching in Toronto, and I met Nicholas. Well, Nicholas was from Lebanon. Well, really from Syria, which is adjacent to Lebanon, but he had, as an Adventist, had gone to Lebanon to the Adventist school in Lebanon, and had graduated there and had received his training there, and then he came to Toronto. Well, so I met Nicholas. He had some meeting that he wanted to go to, a concert, I think, if I remember correctly, after we had met at my mother and dad's house. And so he said, would you come too? I'm going there after this. And so I said, oh, sure. So we went to this concert, and we got to know a little bit more about the Middle East, about Middle Eastern Mediterranean culture. And Nicholas and I, we spent some time together, and we met again, and we met again, and we dated, and we dated. And of course we were right there in Toronto and not far from each other, and we could phone on the phone, and so it was that I started dating Nicholas. We dated for February, March, April, May, during the month of the year of '68. And Wilf was still writing letters to me. We were in sort of a long-distance relationship, sort of. And so I dated Nicholas, and things seemed to be moving very rapidly there. And I didn't write letters to Wilf anymore. He probably wondered what in the world, why. And so then in May of that year, Nicholas suddenly told me, nope, this isn't right. This is not where it's headed, and I'm breaking it off. Well, I was rather heartbroken by that. And so in May, I decided I'm not hanging around. I don't need to be here. Yes, it would be helpful if I continued teaching and earned an income, but I'm not staying here. I'm going back to Andrews University and I'll do my master's program there. Maybe I'll meet some nice guy there. And then also I'll keep writing to Wilf in Winnipeg. So I went to Andrews again, and that was the end of the Nicholas relationship. So we've come to this point where I have lost someone whom I was very much caring for. And I was away for a while at Andrews. And then I came back and I was back in Canada, but I didn't come back to teaching in Toronto. I came back to teaching at an Adventist school called Kingsway College. And they offered me the job to teach in the area that I had been training in the study of English and history. And so I went to teach at Kingsway College. And surprise, who else is teaching at Kingsway College when I get there? Well, in the math science area, sciences I believe it was, there is Nicholas. And shortly after I start teaching there, in September of '69, Nicholas is sure that I have come to teach at Kingsway because he's there. And he invites me to meet with him, and we meet, we talk, we chat, we visit, and I decide that, well, what they're saying that came to my mind at that point was once bitten, twice shy. And I decided that I wasn't going to get into that again. So, and that was another reason why I decided not to get into that relationship again. Well, the other reason was, and it had been a reason that I had pondered even while I was dating Nicholas and falling in love, and that reason is the matter of culture. Now, both of the people that I had dated, as I have described, were Adventists. And as you know, it's important that there is a unity of faith and belief and lifestyle that's really very important when one is dating somebody and when one is planning, perhaps this is going to go to marriage. That's very important. But I was also concerned that culture was important. Now, I grew up in a family in which my mother and father were a pair that worked together and shared, and they pretty much worked and shared everything. They were an excellent balance. It wasn't a case of my dad being up here and my mother down here. They were a balance. They worked together. And when I was dating Nicholas, I began to wonder how things were, how things would be in a relationship, what was expected by that culture, was it expected that the husband be the dominant figure in the family and that the wife would need to be subject to him? I remember too, there were some situations that were described that were currently going on. In the newspapers, you saw the announcements, or on the radio, or on television, you heard a news report of a girl going and meeting somebody in the Middle East and getting married to that person, and then that husband being very domineering. You'd hear things like that, and I just began to wonder, is it good for me to get married to someone from a totally different culture? And I decided, I don't think so. So maybe it was okay that he broke it off and that it was ended. So I didn't go back to a relationship with Nicholas. Instead, I kept writing to Wilfrid. And in the summer of '71, I think it was, he came to visit. He spent some time here in Toronto area. And then in the summer of '72, he came to visit again. We spent some time together in Toronto. I was free, I wasn't teaching right then. And the summer holidays. And he was able to meet my parents. They were able to meet him again. And in the summer of '72, he not only came to Toronto, but then together we flew to California, and I met his parents in California. Not only met his parents, I met his brother, his sister-in-law. I guess his sister wasn't there at that time, but I met most of his family then. And we spent a week or so together in California. And then we flew home. He flew to Winnipeg. I flew home to Toronto. But something else happened in that summer of '72. When he came to Toronto and we were meeting here, he asked if I would marry him. And I said yes. So therefore it was very appropriate that we'd go to California thereafter, and he is able to introduce me to his family. So that was the summer of '72. And in the next few months, we started to plan when the wedding would be. And we decided that we would do it in February of '73. If I remember correctly, he had by that time passed the ECFMG exam. He was by that time beginning to do practice in a hospital in Winnipeg, Misericordia Hospital, if I remember correctly. And he was practicing in the Misericordia Hospital. He had accomplished his goal and he was employed, so therefore a good time to get married. So I went to Kingsway and said, sorry, I'm going to be teaching until February. In other words, the first semester of the year only. And then I'm going to be in Winnipeg because I'm getting married in February and I'm moving to Winnipeg to be with Wilf. And so February came and Wilf and I were married, College Park Church, and then we went to Mexico. What? Mexico? Yes, we went to Mexico because he wanted to show me Mexico, Guadalajara, Mexico City, places where he had been when he was in school in Mexico. So that's where we spent our honeymoon in Mexico and returned after that to Winnipeg and then we lived in Winnipeg. Well, we didn't live in Winnipeg for very long. It was possibility then for him to begin a practice in Oshawa. And so if that was possible, actually there were several other Adventist doctors that had a practice in Oshawa, and they were then willing and eager to welcome another Adventist doctor into their building of practice. So he joined, he said, or made arrangements at least, to practice in Oshawa in this Adventist clinic. And when that was possible, I then went immediately by phone, I think it must have been, to the principal of Kingsway College, and I said, is it possible for me to teach at Kingsway College again? And they said, definitely. So very quickly, the next year, the fall of '73, I was back to teaching at Kingsway, and Wilf and I began our married life at Kingsway College. Well, I was teaching at Kingsway College and he was practicing in Oshawa. So I think that takes us to maybe a summary at this point. Why did I get married to WILFRIED KOEHN from Germany? Well, for one, there was a similarity in culture. And for two, we were the same Seventh-day Adventist religion. And we practiced that religion. We attended church together. I taught Sabbath school. He didn't do that. He was a quieter type of person. And so a teaching job wouldn't have been for him. But he was also interested in music, and he loved to play the piano and organ. So therefore, we attended church together. I taught, he played. It worked well. I think one other thing would be very important in a relationship, besides culture and having the same faith and practicing the same faith. And that is, both people that are married together and are living their life together need to have the same objective, need to have a relationship with Jesus, a relationship with our Heavenly Father. That relationship binds us together with our loving Father, who gave his Son Jesus to save us. That relationship links us together in love and care for one another in marriage. So those are the reasons that I would say, in summary, why I married WILFRIED KOEHN.